first of all, everybody is grieving, as you said, because of the execution. They weren't just found, they were executed by Hamas, 6 hostages, 6 Israelis. One of them was an American as well. And it was a gut punch for the whole country. And I think everybody in Israel is not only mourning their loss, but is frankly angry. And there are people in Israel who are angry at their government. But I think the vast majority of people of Israel are angry at Hamas. And I think the international community should direct its anger at Hamas. And hopefully, if there's enough anger and Hamas understands that they have crossed the line, that will enable us to move forward to achieve a hostage deal. Because the last thing we want to do, Yalda, is in the wake of an execution of hostages, is to make concessions that Israel would otherwise not make, because that is just going to, that's first of all not going to get us to a hostage deal, because they're going to keep moving the goalposts. But beyond that, it's going to endanger more hostages. So it is understandable, first, not only the grief, which is felt everybody in Israel, but I understand the anger. I think if we direct that anger at Hamas, we have a much better chance to get to a deal that can bring some of these hostages home.
And you know, Mr. Dermer, I'm not disagreeing with you on the actions of Hamas and the execution of these innocent civilians who were taken into Gaza and killed in that way. But I just want to focus on the actions of your government, because the Hostages Families Forum, following the Prime Minister's speech on Monday, where he pleaded for forgiveness from the people of Israel for not being able to bring those hostages back home alive, they described his speech as full of lies. They said it was spin. And I'm just going to quote them, because they've said that they've accused your government of criminal negligence.
Listen, I'm not going to get into a debate, Yalda, with the hostage families, with any of them. There are many different types of families with many different views. I think none of us can put ourselves into their shoes and understand a minute of the torment that they're going through day after day. I myself have met 50 or 60 times with hostage families who, as I said, have very different views. What I can tell you, Yalda, is that the government of Israel is committed to getting a hostage deal to bring them home. Unfortunately, we don't have a partner on the other side that has been prepared to do any deal. When the President of the United States put forward a proposal and backed a proposal at the end of May, Israel said yes and Hamas said no. And then only 3 weeks ago, on August 16th, there was a bridging proposal that was put forward by the United States. The Secretary of State Blinken was here in Israel. He met with the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister said he supports that bridging proposal. Hamas wasn't interested in that. What Hamas was interested in at that time is they were interested in a regional escalation, in a war with Hezbollah in Israel, with Iran to strike Israel. That's what they're interested in. What they're interested in right now, frankly, is that there should be, mass unrest in Israel, because for them, that's good news. What we need to do is be united not only within Israel, but also with the international community and all of those who support really civilization against barbarism. Turn our anger towards Hamas. Let them know the game is up, that they have to move towards a deal.
Mr. Dermer, why is the US president then saying to reporters in the United States that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is not doing enough to secure a ceasefire deal? You talked about Hamas not having a partner on the other side, but the president of the United States, your staunchest of allies, someone who came here and gave Israel a bear hug right from the very beginning, has supported Israel for decades, is now saying that your Prime Minister is not doing enough to bring those hostages home. I mean, in fact, your own defense minister has said that, frankly, the discussions around the Philadelphi Corridor is a disgrace. The idea of total victory is nonsense.
I disagree with that judgment, and so does the government of Israel, and so do, I believe, the overwhelming majority of the people of Israel. I was in that cabinet meeting last week on Thursday, and there was a vote. And, all of the relevant authorities in Israel, our IDF, our security services,
they voted for that.
I voted to maintain the Philadelphi Corridor because I know exactly what that is. That is the gateway for Hamas to rearm itself.
And the hostage families have said...
Right. If you just let me, if I can finish this point. I don't think most of your viewers would know Philadelphia from Philadelphia. Philadelphia is a corridor that separates Gaza. It's the border between Gaza and Egypt. For the last 20 years, that border, essentially underground and above ground, has been open to a flood of all the weapons that came in. The attack on October 7th could not have happened if that border was closed. Now, I'm not casting aspersions on Egypt, but the bottom line is that for the last 2 decades, that has been used as a supply chain for Hamas armaments. Right now, Israel is there, and we should not leave that border unless there's a solution in place that is a long-term practical solution on the ground. And there was a discussion in the Israeli cabinet. It was several, and there was a vote. And so the prime minister is supported by the security cabinet of Israel. And I will tell you, as you're walking, I see that you're in Israel, but go around the country and ask people, and you'll see that the overwhelming majority of people support Israel retaining that corridor because they know that if we leave there, that we're just going to repeat October 7th again and again and again. And there's no solution yet that's in place. We're willing to go into a hostage deal, to negotiate a long-term solution for this. But right now, Israel has to maintain that line.
Mr. Dermer, I've been speaking to former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert. I've been speaking to the defense establishment. I've been speaking to the security establishment. And they, with respect, disagree. People who have been military generals in this country for over 30 years, people who have run this country, who have been in charge of that corridor, say that for the Israeli people, for the state of Israel, that is inconsequential. What is important is to ensure that those hostages are brought back alive and that they're rescued from Gaza. And the only way to do that is to reach a ceasefire agreement like the one that you reached in November, which allowed you to bring 105 hostages home and allow for a temporary ceasefire in Gaza, which brought respite to the Palestinian people as well.
That's right. And we support doing a temporary ceasefire, negotiating a permanent ceasefire during that temporary ceasefire. That's exactly what the framework is that's on the table. I don't believe, and it's wrong to suggest that this is the only holdup in the negotiations. There are several points in the negotiations that we have not finalized. There's a big focus right now on the Philadelphi Corridor. I can tell you we worked with the Americans and the other mediators to make clear what our position was during any phase one part of the deal. When you start negotiations over a permanent ceasefire and what that looks like long term, it's a different question. As for a lot of different officials, understand something. We left Lebanon in 2000. Israel unilaterally withdrew from Lebanon, and some of the people you quoted there were responsible for that decision. They promised the people of Israel it would make them safer. Right now, on our northern border, it's ghost towns in Israel. Why? Because we don't have any way up until this point to stop Hezbollah from arming itself with all these weapons that they're using to fire at Israel, and it turned 60,000, 70,000, 80,000 Israelis into refugees in their own country. Wait, let me just finish this point. It's an important point. You said an important thing. You gave a long indictment of people who have a different view. Now I'm going to explain to you where the people of Israel, after the withdrawal from Lebanon, it didn't make us safer, it made us less safe. You also had many people who left that Philadelphia corridor in 2005. They promised the Israeli people this Gaza disengagement, this withdrawal from Gaza, the unilateral withdrawal will make us safer. The Israeli people don't believe it. And what happened on October 7th is part of the story of Israel withdrawing from that corridor.
But is that not just a security failure of the government of Israel? October 7, also the government of Israel needs to take responsibility because it was a security failure on the part of the Israeli government. But I'm so sorry, I'm being told I've got a short amount of time. I just want to ask you a question about the UK suspending some arms to Israel. I just want to get your response to that because a number of officials in Israel have called it disappointing.
Well, I guess they're more diplomatic than I would call it a shameful decision to be made at a time when Israel is fighting a war to have export licenses that are suspended. I think that Israel is on the front lines fighting against Iran and its access that are the enemies of civilization. I see Britain as being a center of civilization. You'd ask yourself how the British people would feel if when Churchill was leading Britain in its fight against the Nazis and Britain was standing largely alone, if all of a sudden there'd be arms embargoes from its great friend and ally. So I think it's a mistake. And I think it's a mistake not only because of the timing, that it comes 2 days or 3 days after the execution of hostages. I think it's a mistake because Israel's not violating international humanitarian law. It's just not true. I think we discussed this last time on your show. And so I think the way the British law works, if I understand, just to finish the sentence, if I understand how British law works, it's if they think there's a risk of international humanitarian law being violated in the future, and therefore you stop these arms. I don't know what that means. That means that Britain can't arm itself. Because anytime Britain, a democracy is in war with terrorism, you could have a risk of a situation. Israel comports with international law fully, and that's why I think this decision It would be bad at any time, but it is horrendous at this time.
Well, of course, the United Kingdom stood with Israel when Iran launched a series of missiles, 300 missiles on Israel in April. They were part of a wider coalition and they stood with Israel, but they clearly have major concerns now in the middle of this war to do this, and not just the United Kingdom. We've seen the same move, weapons being halted by the likes of Spain, by Italy, by Belgium, by the Netherlands, by Canada. The United States temporarily halted a shipment. I mean, these are people who have stood by Israel and stand by Israel publicly and behind closed doors. The fact that today, in the middle of this conflict, they feel they have to do this, that begs the question, what exactly is going on in Gaza for them to feel they need to make this move?
It's not an indictment of Israel, Yalda. It's an indictment of all those countries that you mentioned. You mentioned one country that I heard was Spain. Spain decided to unilaterally recognize a Palestinian state after the worst attack against Jews since the Holocaust. And many other countries right now are folding in the face of internal political pressures because of, frankly, the distorted view that they get from their media day after day. And instead of all the anger of the world being directed at Hamas for using their own people as human shields, for using hospitals and schools and mosques and endangering Palestinians, they're still doing it today. Instead of all of that being directed at Hamas, a lot of people lack the moral clarity, and you end up directing that at Israel. You should not fold in the face of the pressure. What should be done now
including the
is
hostage
the free
families?
world, all the countries that you saw, the free world should stand with Israel. Again, I'm not going to judge a single hostage family. These hostage families want to know, and I'm sure if any of us were in this awful situation, we're doing everything to bring our people home. And it's very hard to put pressure on Hamas, because the world doesn't stand with us. You just gave a litany of countries that have decided to do this or that arms embargo. That tells you that Hamas thinks that its strategy of using its own people as human shields is working. And that's why they'll continue to do it. And they think they're going to pressure Israel and that Israel will fold. I'm telling you, as a member of the Security Cabinet of Israel, we will stand firm. We will not fold. We are going to do everything we can to bring those hostages home. But in that process, we are not going to endanger the security of 10 million Israelis and enable October 7th to happen again and again and again, just like Hamas wants.
Well, this is what you've been saying for 10 or 11 months, and this language and the policy is not working. In fact, Hamas has now said that its policy, if Israeli military attempts to extract those hostages through military means, that they are going to, their policy is to execute the hostages. Clearly, the policy that you have to use military force to get the hostages out is not working. So are you willing to accept more body bags into Israel?
I'm going to have to respectfully disagree with you. The policy of military force got that first hostage deal that you talked about in November, when we got 110 hostages out. We also had several rescue operations where we were able to take 7 or 8 Israelis and to bring them home. In addition to that, the only sign that we've seen of Hamas being willing to compromise on anything came in the wake of a very tough military operation when we went into Rafah and we seized the Rafah crossing and the Philadelphi Corridor. Something, by the way, which most of the countries in the world said would mean thousands and tens of thousands, perhaps, of innocent Palestinians being killed. It was all false. 1 million people got out of harm's way. You know why? Because Israel's not trying to harm them. And when we use that military pressure, it enables us
we also have a polio situation.
Getting to a hostage deal. Hamas has standing orders that if Israel's going to rescue these hostages, that they should be executed. This is the type of organization that we're dealing with. And we take it into account when we plan and think about all these types of operations. And we're going to do everything we can to get these people home. But what the world should do right now is turn its outrage to Hamas. I was pleased to see that the American Justice Department yesterday brought charges against Hamas. I think in Congress, I heard today that they're going to move ahead with action against the Iranians and the Qataris who are harboring Hamas and supporting them. That is the action that has to be taken. When Hamas believes that Israel's military pressure will continue, that the international community, the pressure from the international community is on them, and frankly, that the U.S. and Israel are standing firmly together, that's our chance and our pathway to get to a deal.